Hey, Peter,
Good morning.
how was your weekend?
Yeah, pretty good. Pretty good. Took mom out for Mother's Day. Had a fine leg of lamb feast. Nice Greek restaurant we know.
Sounds very, very good. Very good. Here we had Edgar's 5th birthday. So that was the big deal here.
Ah, that must have been nice.
Yeah. Lots of screaming kids, lots of semi-loud adults, and yeah, very good.
Oh, I saw an email post. Let me just copy the note and I'll drop it in the chat. Hang on a second.
Sure, thank you.
Let me find the link. All right. Okay, there we go. I have the URL pasting now.
That's a long URL. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm sure half of it's
Alert
marketing.
from updates available.
And no, remind me later on. I don't want to update the OS now. That would be bad.
Yeah, Unity is very interesting. That doesn't seem to be that much interest from Fabian and Brandel because it's not open web technologies, but I do think in some areas we have to go outside of that. So it's interesting.
Yeah, for instance, there's one Unity-based, I think it's Unity-based project that replicated Epcot Center from its original state in the early 1980s. And the level of modeling is just mind-boggling. You'd swear that the images from the Unity engine were actual photos taken on the scene.
Well, did you just stop talking or?
Just pause for a second.
Okay, Emily, wait.
Let me see if I can find the URL for that project.
Can you hide that thing, by the way?
Hide what then?
I was
Is that
asking
me?
Emily to hide the chocolate box from yesterday. We have some left over and it's a bit too easy to eat them.
Oh boy, yeah, chocoholics problem. Too many links, hard to find things. All right, that was what it was called. Okay, yeah, pasting the other project in now. Yeah, so this guy apparently used Unity game engine to replicate Epcot. Then he also created a whole bunch of linked QuickTime VR scenes based on, I don't know, I guess, internal snapshots from the Unity platform that lets you also navigate on the open web through the system. So that's the FuturePort 360 is the QuickTime VR version of it. And the FuturePort 82 full experience was the Unity version.
That's interesting. And there's music. Yeah, QuickTime 360 was pretty cool, wasn't it? Wasn't used that much.
Yeah, I guess the authoring side was a lot more awkward than the player side.
It wasn't that bad. It's just, I think it didn't do a lot of pre-caching. So whenever you clicked on to jump, it just took a long time to load the next thing. And that's roughly my memory.
So I'm sipping a wild berry tea.
So I wonder if we are the only ones today. It's a bit quiet. I heard from Isabel at the Linnaean today. She had a cold, or rather a flu, when she got back, so she's been a bit delayed. But I should be seeing her this week, so it'd be nice to have something to show, as we already have.
Very good. I've been sorting through working with the Tinderbox files from the Crystal language. That's rather interesting. Mark Bernstein stores everything in an XML format. And so basically the whole thing with Tinderbox is that you have notes and you have arbitrary attributes on notes, and it's all like a giant big table, so that the notes effectively have all of the attributes on every single note available. And then he has prototype-based inheritance to control which attributes are visible when you're looking at any given note and what all the default values are. So then in his data file, he's only basically saving attribute values that differ from what would be computed by using the attributes defaults and the prototypes values for the attributes. So until a value deviates from what it would have been through the inheritance tree in the original base default, no data is actually stored. Then when you enter a value that deviates, it adds into the XML the attribute value for that attribute that's different for the particular node. And some of the attributes are stored on the note object itself, and the other attributes are stored as attribute elements underneath the node object. So now I've got, so even though visually to the user and in your mental model, you just have attributes with arbitrary names, some of the attributes are stored one way and some are stored a different way. And then you have the inheritance tree. So I'm having to write code that can cover those two cases. And then if it doesn't find the attribute on the node, it has to chain through the inheritance hierarchy. And if it doesn't find anything on the inheritance hierarchy, then it has to go to the data dictionary of all the attribute names to find the default attribute. Then in the Crystal programming language, there are two ways that you can accomplish that. One way is to build an XPath to directly drill down to whatever datum you're interested in. And the other approach is to just use the XPath to create a collection of, say, all of the attribute dictionary keys, or a collection of all of the note objects, or a collection of all of the attribute objects underneath the note, and then basically use a programming style dictionary lookup to get down to the data. And I've been benchmarking the two approaches, and it looks like using the fancy XPath to do it all in one go is actually slower than just grabbing the collection of nodes and then going old school and just treating it as ordinary objects in the programming language itself and reaching down into their properties.
Sounds interesting. I don't have many comments, of course.
Yeah, basically, when it's done, I'll have a nice, simple, get the attribute for the node ID. And the user won't have to think about any of that, so it'll all be hidden and be a reusable library.
Good,
Hi, Mark. I was just talking about the Tinderbox data format Frode there.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Rafael. Good to see you.
Hey, Rafael. I'm seeing Monica
Hello.
tomorrow, which is good. I had to
Awesome.
cancel last Friday for reasons.
Mm-hmm.
The reasons were I was in town with one of my very first students, also one of my very brightest, so it all went downhill after her. And I mean, let's put it this way: she's Lebanese Christian, living in Paris currently. But when I was teaching this part-time course, in one of the discussions, she started using Plato's Caves, not to show off, but as an actual just a point. And I was like, "How old are you?" She's 23 years younger than me. I found out this weekend. Anyway, so yeah, met her, and after the Groucho, we decided. When I had to go home, she had to have somewhere to sit. I said, "Well, let's go to the Royal Society because I have a membership and you can just hide."
As one does.
Well, Mark, when you're in town, you should definitely apply for membership there. I think it really would suit you. And you need some sponsors, and I can be at least two of them if I move my head quickly enough. Yeah, it's lovely because we walked in there and there was these a stack of Pico VR headsets on the table. So then it was an instant question of what is this? And because, I said, I don't know what this is. I'm just a fellow here. They talk to you properly because they're at a place where they expect people to be interested properly. So the upside of it was they were presenting what's called the overview effect. I mentioned a little bit on Friday, but the overview effect in reality is what astronauts describe seeing the world from space. You look at it and every single person that's ever lived, everything that's ever happened is on this tiny little thing. And your philosophy and worldview changes. So they wanted to have that in VR. And I thought it was going to be quick, but first there was a half an hour introduction on climate change, some interesting statistics, but come on. And that it was half an hour of an experience. It was essentially a movie in VR. I'm just, David is just joining in. Hello, David.
Hi there, how are you?
I'm good. I'm just mentioning a little thing from Friday where I happened to be walking into my club and there was this VR thing on basically space on the overview effect. And so we put the headset on and it was all non-interactive. But, we have the pale blue dot that gets bigger. We go past the moon and we see it and it was all nice. But in the session on Friday, we did actually, during the session, do a version of it. Afterwards in the evening, I did many similar things. And I realized that theirs wasn't very good, but what I could do wasn't very good either. And the actual challenges were surprising because it always felt like it was a graphic of the Earth. It never felt like the Earth. So if we were to be serious about such a thing, and I don't think this is the thing for us to do, but so much would have to be done. We would have to have the right specular highlights of the oceans. The clouds would have to run. It basically would have to be a video. So I searched for video. I know there is a satellite out there in geosynchronous orbit taking pictures of the Earth all the time. I just couldn't find the images. So that was fascinating. But anyway, back to today. I've been talking to Isabel via email. I'll be seeing her this week. Isabel from the Linnaean Society. And what I need from Fabian and Brandel, who are not here yet, is we need, if we can, have a way to see these cards and actually lift them up. The fact that these authoring software, Spoke and Blender and stuff, doesn't allow you to have interactive elements is really quite bizarrely crazy. But it's part of the journey of us realizing what VR is today. David, it looks like it's even warmer where you are.
Yeah, it's pretty warm. It's probably around 80 degrees, 83 degrees this morning.
What's that in the rest of the world, in metric?
I think that's about 29 or something, maybe. I'm not sure. Let me see.
We have 22 here. That's hot enough for us.
Yeah,
Sounded just right to me the first time.
gonna say. That's not.
Wait,
That's,
Raphael,
that's trying to go run into the shade, a cold cave or something.
Raphael, show me again. Mirandopolis. Okay, that's more interesting than the temperature. Also,
the translation for the city name would be like the city of Miranda.
yes, and Miranda is a very silly British comedian, so that's not a place I'd like to live. Also, as just a brief thing, I got an email from a user last week saying, "Hi, I've downloaded all your software, bought everything. I think it's absolutely brilliant, but I don't know how to get anything useful out of it." So that was a bit of a backhanded compliment. So we arranged.
It wasn't Ted, was it?
No. No, he has agreed to just look at it once, which is, bad enough. But so we had a session today where I went through a lot. She has ADHD. She's an academic in a different field, some kind of psychology or something. So they don't use DOIs. But it was fun to have a real user with a real interest actually looking at things.
Mm.
It's really hard to organize that for testing. It's easy to find a user, but to find someone who's passionate enough to actually get in touch and therefore be paying attention is something else.
This was for Liquid?
Liquid author and reader, primarily author.
Okay. Okay.
But I do understand your point, Fred. I mean, by weird random event, I actually, out of the blue, I had a fellow sort of tinderbox heavy user ring me up. He's in London for a conference, came down and stayed for the weekend. And we were sort of planning to write a book about using that tool, but we were mulling over the problem of getting people to think, which sounds sort of like an oxymoron, because the problem is, so the tool has an audience of broadly academic people, people certainly mostly who've been through further education. And not surprising, if you say to people what we're trying to do is to help you think, they get very bent out of shape by this and sort of feel that there's some veiled insult, which is not what it means. But what it sort of shows is what we're, perhaps just because it's what we're used to, we're used to using software tools that basically, give us an answer. We put the penny in the slot and a chocolate bar falls out the bottom. And you get what the program gives you. The idea that you might use a tool to actually assist your understanding and the shaping of your thoughts is actually remarkably absent from our understanding of how to use tools.
Randall, Mark was commenting on, I had a user last week say, I got all your software, it looks fantastic, I can't get any use out of it. So we had a session today where I walked through a lot of things and answered questions. And Mark was reflecting on how it's really hard to get that kind of user testing where someone actually wants to learn to think with a tool. You either almost pay or force someone to test, but to have someone with a passion was really interesting. So that was that. But just briefly, before we get started with other things, I just want to repeat to you, Brandel, the news that I got an email from Isabel of the Linnean. She will see me today, not today, sorry, this week for coffee. But is there a way that we can manage to have a slip or a card that's actually interactable in space? How hard will that be? Because right now we can just have it static, right?
No, it would be possible to have, like that Blender scene is static and not in the web or anything, but it would be possible to have something where you can kind of pick up and manipulate multiple cards. It's just a matter of the representation and what it should be based on. But if you look at things like the WebGL dragging demo as part of the WebXR dragging demo that comes with 3JS, then that would be a perfectly reasonable thing to augment or use as the basis for it. That's how I built Web Reality.
Yeah, I think we just need three things. We need a floor, a table, and one card, so that she can, learn that the hand interaction is actually pretty good. I lift it up, and then I tell her, hold the other end, and you can stretch it, and it becomes bigger.
That's more. That's
yeah. Sorry.
But,
well, I'm thinking because of the mural, we do the scaling. So I was wondering if it had any relation to that. That would be ideal. I just don't know what's feasible within limited tool set.
Yeah. Those are possible to put together in that kind of time frame. Yeah, I can try to do that when I go this week.
That would be really. I see hands coming, but yeah, Randall, if you could do anything like that, just because obviously I have the room with a huge slip as a poster, and I think that helps. And we have the mural with the taxonomy, which helps. All of these things are very good, but I'm sure she will ask the question of the basic thing, and if it's possible, that would be amazing. Okay, Raphael.
Yeah, a little bit of reflection on your first comment on your app. Something that I think quite a lot about is, for example, if we take the iPhone, right? This is the iPhone 10. It's not the newest generation, but it's not the oldest. And this iPhone 10 has, iOS 14 or 15 something. And it's impossible for me to go back to iOS 1.0, for example, like the first version of iOS. I'm stuck in this version, and this version has, if you go from the first version to this version, how many new features and changes happened since it was introduced? Like hundreds, thousands, probably. And back then it was simpler. If you went into the settings, you had less options to choose from, less things to worry about. It was a lot simpler. And that's a problem with every single software that exists for a long time. It tends to go towards complexity and towards having more and more and more functions. And because of that, it makes it so the onboarding process is a lot harder. How do you introduce people to new apps, new software, new ideas, new things? So I keep coming back to this idea of having a way that you unlock things in the product, in the service, in the software slowly as you gain experience with it through use cases, through examples, through different means. So in the case of author, maybe one way would be to have different activities, different examples that people could do. And then after they do that, they can go maybe to level 2, where there's a little bit more complex things. And then once they do that, they learn how it connects to level 1. Then they learn about level 3. So it's a little staircase of complexity, so that people can know what they can get out of it and what they can change and what impact it has. So if you do this, it does that. If you do this, it's better to do this. So it's a different way of thinking, but it's always nice to have a way or a means to go back to a simpler version of whatever it is you are building. Because everybody that grew up with the app when it was simple and it became complex is a lot better than whoever jumps in when it's already complex. If you think about Photoshop, for example.
I think actually there's a lot of interesting things there, but one of them, I think there is one fallacy, and that is that the newer phones and the newer OS is more complicated. I think since you happen to use the example of Apple and iOS, I think they spent a lot of effort to simplify. So I think that you can get quite a few more basic things done with a newer phone than older phone. However, the fact that you no longer click a button, you do a swipe, all these changes, when you show it to someone who hasn't used it, are actually baffling, that they managed to do that. So I don't know, Brandel, you're the one who helps communicate to people things like this. Do you have any thoughts on how Apple managed to, because they almost managed to just sneak it in. Hey, you got a new shiny phone. It works in a very different way to even unlock it. We're not going to tell you much, but still you're going to be happy.
I don't want to make this a conversation about Apple products, but it's just things tend to get complex over time.
Yeah. Well, so there's a ratcheting effect, and one of the things, we actually had a function recently where we had the head of human interface, Alan Dye, come talk to us about that very sort of buttonless kind of interface that came with iPhone 10. And it was definitely the subject of simply a creative design from iOS 1 through to iOS 6. It was just getting added to and more complicated. iOS 7 was a big turning point where people took that as a time to look at it and figure out what all does it do now, and how would you try to reimagine those things as all fitting together as though they came all at once. And so there was a very conscious kind of unwinding of that accretion as the basis for the design to try to reintegrate those things as sort of intrinsic, as though they had all been there at the beginning. But a couple things. iOS 7 is now like 9 versions of iOS ago, and 2, it's not possible to unwind one's own thinking perfectly to come up with that set of functionality, nor is it possible even if you didn't know all of those steps, because of the way that the different kind of assumptions are backed into it. In the same way that in God We Trust was only added to the Pledge of Allegiance in the 1950s, probably as a counterpoint to the godless communists, and that the Pledge of Allegiance was only established in the 1920s, probably as a result of the massive influx of migrants and trying to kind of carve out a more coherent national identity. So the reasons why things go in at different times matters a lot as well. So yeah, it's Apple tried and arguably has tried harder than others. I think there are a lot of very, very silly things in, for example, not just Android, but specifically the Android settings systems. They're garbage and really frustrating. My wife tested them for a long time. So yeah, it's wonderful to have the opportunity to have somebody kind of test with you like that. And it is possible to try to do some of that unpicking of things to figure out where they go. But I feel like we could go a lot further with it, which is why I want to make calculators without buttons and stuff.
I think we should need to go across to Mark in a second, but of course I have something else to say. There is a huge difference in user between an iPhone and Photoshop. Of course, the same human being may use both, but one of them is your work and the other one is your social life. Some people invest more time learning things for their social life, nothing wrong with that. But to do the iPhone, even if Apple paid me $1 million a year and made me all kinds of special person, there's no way in hell I would be in charge of the iPhone, because it is such a mental thing to try to make it simple for people. Not saying whether they succeed or not, but that's the goal. But then with Photoshop, when I was growing up, oh my God, there's a new version of Photoshop. What have they got? I got to look at this. I got to look at that. I got to learn everything. That's the kind of mad person who does that. But those, the 3D software, the image software, the video software, it's a very different mentality. So I think that feeds into your earlier points about, how and when you introduce people. I feel a little old when there's a Premiere or rather Final Cut or Photoshop upgrade now, and I don't actually learn all the features. That's really, really bad. But with Author, my goal is to keep it simple and add features in the background that you may or may not need. And it's very much based on Doug's work, of course, where the basic user should sit down and do basic work. But if you want to unlock more functionality, it should be available. Hugely important topic and hugely difficult. Oh, one more thing. And I think this is the biggest one. This is why I think work in VR is so important. Because people think they know what an iPhone is, and therefore learning what it is doesn't occur to them. But people don't know what it is to work in VR. So that's why we have the imagination opportunity that I bang on about every 15 seconds. Mark.
Yeah, two things. One is just a very brief thing, as you were thinking, you talk about interaction with cards, is what one sort of thing I could imagine one wanted to do with a card is, as not all of us are great at reading handwriting from the 1700s, would be an interaction where effectively, and this would be made reasonably possible, assuming the cards have been transcribed, would be to effectively exchange the handwritten text to the card, which will effectively be an image at this point, for effectively the text in a more readable modern script, which might then be actually digital text and offer through that further affordances. The other thing is, people were talking about books and design. I'm really kicking myself. I thought I'd saved it. I didn't, but I saw mention on Twitter of somebody. It's somebody else who worked at Apple, and before that, what was the thing that basically was too early to market, which was a sort of mobile data device.
The Magic Cap. Right?
Yeah,
General Magic. Yeah,
General Magic. So there's a guy who worked at General Magic then as Apple, and he was. It's obviously the guy's sort of finished, and he's now writing a book, and it's sort of a management thing. But I think there might be some interesting bits in it. And he was talking about the way in which jobs would basically help position a thing by basically explaining the thing that you have is insufficiently good. All right, okay. Maybe you're ahead of me there, but is that it? Is that the book I'm referring to, or is that?
Oh, no. This book is from the long time ago.
All right. Anyway, I'm sorry if I find it. I mention it in case somebody says, "Oh no, I heard of that as well." If not, I'll go away and do my homework and come back with a better recommend. It's a bit tangential.
Is it built by Tony Fadell?
It's a kind of thing where probably one or two bits in it might be sort of interesting in the context of the sort of things we're discussing here. And that was basically
93.
You're talking about built by Tony Fadell, I think.
Ah, okay.
I had lunch with Michael Chow once. I'm famous. That was long after the Newton.
Dollar General?
Oh, and I was also sorry. I was going to briefly say Fred, I thought very politely said, he mentioned this idea. I was looking at this device and showing things on the globe, and the rest of us there at the time, not particularly intentionally, managed to pour a lot of cold water on it, only because reflecting on the fact that even showing a map is not without unintended, doesn't come without unintended consequences. Even showing something as simple as the globe, well, what season, and the fact that, in terms of talking about the sea, to most of us who live on the land, the sea is just the stuff we can't sit in, but actually it is another whole ecosystem. And so, so it's just coloring the parts that aren't land blue is also making an unintentional sort of statement about it. So it's interesting. It comes with unexpected challenges. The idea is really nice, and of course, you as you turn to the implementation, you realize that there are an awful lot of little things you have to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, I very much agree with what you're saying there, and I think everyone in the group agrees that implementation, because we also need to have crazy discussions all over the place, but there is so much that happens at that stage. And that's why I'm currently thinking more about normal stuff, like, just being able to move this card and then maybe having the magic of scaling it. That in itself will come with issues. If you just look at my desk right now, I'm not going to show it, it's embarrassing. It's a mess, right? So anytime you add an interaction and an affordance, you create an opportunity for mess. Right, so to do all these basic things, I think can be incredibly valuable for us. But at one point we have to do, not a map, but a globe. At one point we have to do it. I don't think the technology is ready for it though. Anyway, that's just a smile. A smiley emoticon comes in here. I think Brandel is sneezing. I think that's what we're saying. His Brandel emoticon name sneezing there. Anyway. Right. I thought Fabian was maybe wanting to show the stuff that he accidentally put on Twitter in our chats. But,
Oh, here's a truffle that would look amazing in 3D.
yeah, that's actually a good point. I just got an email from a German user, and she called me Mr. Hegland. I'm Dr. Hegland now, for crying out loud.
Oh, don't wear it out.
It was just funny. People shouldn't call me Mr. So I was just like, why are you calling me Mr.? Yeah, this thing you just sent here, Peter. Yeah, that kind of actual physical based stuff would be amazing in VR, absolutely.
I believe that book is the book by Tony Fadell is the one we were talking about more.
Yep, thanks.
But this one is, let me just use the word, this is basically pornography. The photography, black and white, and it's the 90s era color schemes, and they're talking about not necessarily the reality of the Newton, but a lot of the ideas. And the speech that was used to sell the concept to Scully on the plane to Japan is in here. It was actually used as a commercial later. Yeah, it's just so beautiful. I think the Newton is maybe the most beautiful device ever made. And I'm not talking about the very first one. I'm talking about, well, you know that, oh, the name dropped out of my head. The British designer dude who did the physical stuff. Come on.
Ive.
You dropped out.
Ive. Johnny
Yeah,
Ive.
Johnny Ive, yes. You know, his first project apparently at Apple was to do the pen for the Newton. The round metal one. Yeah, it's just, any of you use the Newton?
I was all set to buy one and they canceled the product right before I was going to purchase my order. I was so frustrated. I was actually going to do the purchase and suddenly I get this message that the product's canceled, it's not there anymore. And if only 2 days before, if only 2 days before.
And you're banging on the door, shut up and take my money.
I was in university at the time. I didn't have money for it. And I still did it. And my parents were very, very angry for a very, very long time. So there you go.
And it loved my handwriting too. I was able to try one at a trade show and it had like 100% perfect recognition of my writing. So it must be that whoever they trained the AI for the handwriting recognition on had exactly the same style of handwriting that I did. So I was like, oh, what do they mean they have problems with recognition? This thing's perfect. It won't make a single mistake on my script.
They used a couple of people. I know Bruce Horn was one of them. His handwriting was trained on it. But yeah, the cartoons really didn't help, did it? But yeah, it was wonderful.
I'll never forgive Doonesbury.
Yes, Doonesbury, thank you. But just the affordance of select text, drag it to the side, that's how you copy. You know, that's beautiful. Right? It doesn't disappear, it's there. Yeah, oh yeah, well, we could spend a whole week on, wasn't Newton lovely? Anyway.
I saw an interesting claim this week by somebody talking about the difference or the non-difference between tools for thought and social networks.
Mhm.
That a tool for thought can't not be a social network. That fundamentally thinking needs to be something that is kind of socially engaged and gathered so that people can sense make together. And so that was neat to think about in terms of when one was doing writing. And for example, like, yeah, you know, VR aside, what would author look like, multiplayer, and what are the ways in which you would, because the other thing about multiplayer is that it also sort of results in requiring signaling as distinct from action. So it's like telegraphing actions as well as having actions. And so it's an interesting thing to, because I mean, I think it's a stance that's a little abrupt and provocative, but I take the point, because I think that, yeah, what an actual social network is much more than most people give them credit for, and indeed like sort of cognitively more informative than most of the social network managers would like to admit, in terms of what kinds of thoughts Twitter is a tool for and what kinds of thoughts Facebook is a tool for. But yeah, interesting to think about as a sort of as a test case for it. Like, how is it that Twitter is a tool for a thought, and how is it that Author is a social network? Because, you know, obviously it doesn't have multiplayer right now, so it's a social network only insofar as you can post notes to each other that come in Author form, essentially, by saving and loading files. But yeah.
A tool for thought is a use, not an affordance. I say that because a stick in soil can be a tool for thought, obviously, right? And you can have the most powerful whiteboard, digital 3D technology and do a penis on it, like Top Gear usually does here, the TV program. So the affordances that a social network and other things give us for thought. I mean, the tools for thought phrase is ridiculous. It has very little meaning, but I think it's a nice unifying cry. If someone is interested in that, clearly they're interested in something similar to what we're similarly interested in. But it is a little bit odd when it comes to the whole network thing. The wonderful book, Randall, that you forced me to buy, thinking outside the brain. I'm now just started the social thinking together thing. And of course, Doug Engelbart's augmentation was always as a group. I think that there are different aspects of development, like, in VR, we're almost giving up on the meeting room thing because billions are being poured in there. So there's almost no point for us to try to do something new. That's how I feel. I'm not sure. But when it comes to network thought with author is absolutely multiplayer, but it's multiplayer through the act of publishing. So it's that rather than Google Doc doing it at the same time. But that just means, like, we have different temporal tempos for email versus Twitter versus book, which is magazines and all of that. This is the same. There is a back and forth, but you are allowed to sit and write quite a long time. But it absolutely has to be thought of as being that.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting to sort of recognize the term of engagement, because a lot of the time multiplayer to people means that instantaneous or turn to turn at least kind of interaction. But in fact, those turns can be much longer, like the pace layers that the guy from Wired talks about. No, not Wired. What is his name? From Whole Earth Catalog. Anyway,
Brian?
Yeah, Stuart Brand. And so that a turn can be the publication of something. And do you have a sense in which author facilitates those turns being sort of rich or imbued with information that's relevant for one another?
I shouldn't say it probably because this is public, and I just did this session with Nico, a user who wanted to learn how to use it. But most of the tools in author are useless, I think. They come into use at different times, but a lot of it is me experimenting. So, all my problems in the entire world will be solved if I can do this. Right? I fully accept that it's my childish /artistic sensibility coming into it. And there are a few things that are really useful for the whole thinking thing. And I think, believe it or not, the best thing is that an author, like every piece of software, you can do the escape key to go to full screen, but an author, you can use it to go into full screen. So that means that to get away from everything else, to actually think, to write, to edit, it's such a small amount of effort that it's done, rather than having to move up and you have Fitz law and you have all these issues it's so much effort to go full screen normally, and the keyboard shortcuts are really weird. So it's surprising what works. There are some things that are more advanced, but they need further polish. An example would be Command-Shift-D to show only grayed out headings plus any defined concepts, or Command-Shift-N to show any names. But we need further things like a way to say some names we don't want to see because they're obvious, they're not useful. Another one to remove duplicates because they're not removed. So the more advanced the capability, the more polish it needs. And that's kind of surprising. And then the question becomes, should we invest in that polish, or should we say we learned something and move on to another functionality? Mark?
Yeah, no, I find this really interesting because it sort of rests with the conversations I've been having with my guests over the weekend about the fact that, I mean, it's somewhat harsh in a way to say that, maybe many of the things are no use, the sort of features are no use, because actually really what it's saying is it's not, we've got to a point where I think our starting expectation is everything is effectively like an iPhone utility. It does one thing, does it really well, but it does one thing. So no coloring outside the lines at all. And in the general sphere of certainly software tools for thought, you need very different things at various times. You actually need you need view specs, you need different views. That's actually quite advanced. So most of us probably think of text input as being interacting with a word processor. And that's actually not, that's just playing at a typewriter on a screen. actually the most useful thing is to be able to put in text into something with which you can do all sorts of other interesting things. And so, you know, I do find the notion of tools of thought seductive, because I think it's something we need to relearn. I think to a certain extent, and entirely by accident, mainly because we all, I don't know where mine is now, but yeah, we all wander around with one of these things and sort of operate and interacting through that, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it leads to an expectation of simplicity that is not always useful. The expectation of simplicity in the wrong context is actually debilitating to getting stuff done. Are you muted?
It is, of course, easier to say, you know, to blame the tool. I mean, my father was amazing. He was very focused. He didn't care about any kind of tech. He never ever bought a laptop. He always had his stuff as a Christmas present or something. So he never had any choice. He didn't want to learn, but he still managed to build a sizable company. Because unlike me, who was like, oh, it's too bright or not enough coffee or whatever it might be. I know you're talking about the actual tool itself and what it helps us to do, but at a certain point, we should get on with it. Of course, us as tool thinkers may have a different perspective on that. I mean, we can't sit in Raphael's office. Look at that.
It is a nice office. I think that's true, but you know, the proof of the pudding is in the tasting, and so, you know, building a tool and then doing something valuable with it is a valuable action, both because you're making something and because you're making something to make something. So that's one of the quandaries of tool building, is that you still have to be able to make stuff, and some people get lost in that kind of hole of abstraction where they don't build things with it. And I'm still kind of a little bit sheepish about the fact that the tool that I have used the most in my life is a program I wrote over about a period of a week in 2016 that I have made minimal additions and alterations to as people have asked for extra features. But it's really interesting because, yeah, those features are the ones that people have asked for. They really stick out as weird, but they are really useful. So you can see how sort of the accumulation of those, if more people talked to me, would turn into an increasingly ungainly system, leading to, you know, second system syndrome and stuff like that. I had a good guess about the capabilities that it should have at first. So they serve me pretty well for the most part, but yeah, it's difficult to imagine how to expand it without it sort of crushing that initial kind of kernel of an idea of what it did and what it absolutely doesn't.
I can certainly echo that, because in a sense I work at the other end of that spectrum. So the tool I use most of my working day, which so Peter also knows, and I won't mention their name, but it's, you know, it's a notation tool, is just exactly what you were describing. You know, it's gone from System 9. It was first written in 2000, but actually draws on a code base going back to 1982, I think. So it came out of StorySpace, which is a very early hypertext system. And if you pause to look, there are all sorts of interesting things in there. Partly, some slightly moribund because it's quite tightly glued to one operating system, the Mac, but it's gone through System 9, OS X, you know, and on. And so part of the thing I find trying to help people use it is explain that, you know, it's a tool set. You don't have, if you don't play with every tool in the box, you haven't you know, in a sense, you shouldn't be worrying that you're not getting value. What you should worry about is whether you get a day's work done, or you do the task you set out to do. And this is where I think it's really interesting. The whole sort of tools of thought thing is, you know, actually what you should relish having a toolbox, and the fact that if you need a draw plane once a year, you can reach the far side of the workshop, get your draw plane, use it to do that particular task that it's needed for, and put it back. And if you never use it, it doesn't matter, but you know you got one. it helps to have some idea of what it's for, if only so that someone says, the thing you need to use is this. But we do tend to get, and I see it in myself when I'm trying to learn something, that you sort of feel that I need to be able to operate this correctly, or I shouldn't be playing with it. Otherwise I am just playing. And so it's difficult, and it's one of the things I'm sort of working on for in a sense, a book I'm working on with somebody. Dealing with this very subject of sort of effectively dealing with thought tools and how best to learn and interact with them.
Mark's comment made me remember about something else related to software, which is we should be able to pick and choose what we want in the software when it has too many features, or at least to showcase what it is we want. This is something that has been showing up in software, I think starting 5 years ago, or when Adobe Lightroom came out, not the classic version. When it first came out, you were able to hide and show different areas of the interface. So if I wanted just one specific area, then that's the one that would show. The rest of the things wouldn't show. And you can even customize the Lightroom logo with your own logo if you wanted to. And that's good. I mean, having the freedom to change things, or in Pixelmator, you're able to do that as well. It's a simpler version of Photoshop, but you're able to remove things from the interface that you don't use, so it doesn't clutter the interface. So if you only use half a dozen tools, that's fine. You can have only half a dozen tools in your interface.
Why do you need your tools to be visible?
Okay, and I also like not having an interface for it. But being able, you need to know what exists in order to know what is possible. And then once you know what's possible, how do you kind of do a deep dive and learn those things?
YouTube.
That yes, that's where everybody learns everything. And also Skillshare. Don't forget that it's the sponsor of every single YouTube video.
Yeah, and VPNs. VPNs are just naughty.
Yes.
So within this kind of what we use things, so here's a question, maybe Brandel. Can apps take over default queries in Siri? For instance, remind me, just put something in the reminders app, right? Could a user...
Oh, that's interesting.
Because I used that a lot for a while, and then I realized it's the bucket that Mark talks about. Remind me of this, that, and the other, and then I don't check it.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, I believe Siri you can help Siri respond to more stuff, but I don't know whether you can override system default things. I know that there was a lot of work to allow things that were calling but not phone to appear as calling, and other system things like that. I will talk to somebody in Siri. I've got a friend there who might be able to answer. I wouldn't necessarily get it done. These things are on years-long technology roadmaps, but it's an interesting question that I will put to my friend there.
Yeah, thank you. It could be fun because I could imagine, Apple. This is very much going back to Raphael's original thing. A lot of Apple's apps are ridiculously simple and featureless because they have to be understandable. So obviously, reminders is there's always some kind of update, and they're always very clever at putting the update functionality very, very hidden. So it is really for more advanced users, which is totally fine. But I could imagine, obviously Apple is very good with privacy, but I could imagine saying to Apple that for my Mac and iOS, I want all my own applications that I approve to be able to talk to each other. So for example, if I speak a reminder on Apple Maps, I would like to see where I said that, right? And have all these things go together. So in Calendar, if I go back, any pictures I took, I should be able to see from there. I mean, there are so many integrations that could be done, even in just 2D. And of course, in VR, we can make these things absolutely ridiculously useful if the
Yes.
user and the companies allow this data to be available for the user.
Yeah, that's a big if though. You know,
Yes.
the question of what is a plausible indication of user consent and on what basis is something that plagues Apple at every turn, obviously, but also every single discussion of web access standards. You know, because I sit on the committee working those things out, and there are so many people who say like, oh, just put a permissions gate up, but it's hard to overstate the danger that's posed by giving third parties access to 6 degrees of freedom information of head movement. It's individualizable, and if you were to add other sort of compromising details of the kind that would be very, very valuable for the purposes of rendering within VR, then marketers would know too much, and it would be completely impossible to anonymize.
Did you see the article on Ukrainian tractors being bricked when the Russians stole them?
No.
It's worth doing
That's
a
neat.
search. It was very, very interesting because it was on Twitter. I retweeted it. I couldn't find it right now. Check. But the point of the article is, oh, how nice. All the Russians got screwed. But it talks about how John Deere has so many sensors on their tractors now that they learn so much about the farm. But the only way the farmer actually has access to that is to buy a data package or something, as in they don't have access to the data they generate. But not only that, there's the level above that where that data is then sold in aggregates. So that
you have to pay for your own data back.
No, but it's sold in aggregate. So let's say you have a medium farm and you do all kinds of things. You can buy some of it back about your farm, but the aggregate data for, let's say, the entire West Coast of the United States is sold to investors who can then, on the markets, bet against you because they have better understanding of the crop yield of that season or whatever. So the many levels of what we mean by privacy is just ridiculously complex. I fully understand and agree with that. I still wouldn't mind if my Apple provided calendar could show me my Apple provided photos.
Yeah. I was talking to this friend in Siri. Well, actually, he's now in ML Health about the fact
that's
that
the one. Thank you.
Siri, yeah, Siri. We don't have this is probably sensitive, but we don't have a way to. We don't have a line of sight essentially to Siri answering questions about your health that your phone knows. Because of the differences of the secure enclaves and the security policies that those two things work on. And so, kind of more broadly, that means that we believe that other companies that do provide information like that are imperiling things in a really terrible way in terms of exposing their users, and also the legal exposure that also entails if anybody comes and kind of notices. Something that I have not yet figured out whether or how or if I can push people to do is try to inform lawmakers of what our policies and preferences are, such that we believe that they should be the floor under which nobody is allowed to drop in terms of privacy protections, because I think that it would be useful to oblige the rest of the industry to observe those practices, such that there's no profit, to your point of like undercutting the sellers like undercutting and second guessing farmers in providing kind of an adversarial mix of services where you're betting on farmers by providing them tractors, but then allowing people to bet against them by telling them the secrets. It'd be nice to make sure that John Deere was on one person's side.
Did you guys see, I think it was an episode on The Good Fight or The Good Wife, where they used a Fitbit to prove that someone could have been a murderer because they said they were in a certain place having sex with someone. But then they looked at the Fitbit, the heart rate didn't increase. So clearly that person wasn't doing that activity. I think
I did see that episode, but yeah, there was some internet journalism, less about murder and sex, and about whether somebody ran a ran a marathon in the appropriate time, and yeah, they definitely did the track, but it's likely that they ran. So it's likely that that was the story that it was kind of based on in the writers' minds, that they had taken a bicycle through some of it in order to be able to sustain the heart rate that they had through the timing they had.
Bicycle, the original tools for the mind, right?
But fish and the
Yeah,
bicycle.
iPhone for the feet.
but
That was just positive, though.
you
They
see
might have
that.
been taking.
I mean, I've sat in a well, it was a design meeting, but where it was for a ship, and someone had genuinely, with their engineering mindset on, had suggested that in order to, for fire and rescue purposes, that everyone should carry a tracker. And in fact, because people might lose them, the sensible idea would be to effectively chip them like you do pets. And you could see half the room turning green at this point about all the ways that would possibly not work as intended. That's even assuming the damn trackers work.
Yeah, the Apple tags, the Air tags or whatever, they're good, but they're really slow, which I think is good. It shows the privacy things are quite strong. Very often I will get a notification that Edgar's bag is no longer with me because he's at school. It'll take me long enough that if it was stolen, the thief would be in another country by then. But if you need to locate something later, it's useful. So it's a very different thing. But anyway, all kinds of interesting issues here. So I talked with a friend on Saturday whom I hadn't seen in a while. And sorry, Emily's in and out distracting me because there's going to be another children's party. Edgar turned 5 yesterday, but he's celebrating with his school friends on Saturday, so it's all a bit messy. Anyway, so this guy, he is in military intelligence. He did Afghanistan for a while. He was in charge of half the country. I mentioned him to you. Really nice guy, but further crying off the monkeys. Yes. Yes, you may. Yes, can I continue with my... Sorry, it was both Edgar and the older boy's birthday yesterday. So Emily now asked if she could give the younger boy a special present. So that was very nice. So we talked a little bit about VR. And I really couldn't get him to think about VR. I think it's an interesting thing for us. All he was interested in was it's an even more immersive technology that we really want our children to be in there. And I was just trying to say it's a valid question. Others are dealing with it, but when you're in there, you might as well be able to do something useful. But it never really settled in his mind. And so he's a very clever, intelligent, focused person, but he was really stuck at that level.
Right. Well, I think that the crux of it is that we are such phenomenal abstracting agents. We have the ability to pour our mind through these incredibly narrow conduits into very complicated spaces, very complicated landscapes of which there are very weird and different kind of handles and opportunities for understanding and interpreting and assessing. So Tim Cook famously does not want to see pictures. He wants to see tables of numbers that mean things to him. And he's an operations person. He was the chief operations officer before he was CEO. And he did ops at Dell before he came to Apple. And so he knows about things and he understands them in terms of seeing grids of numbers. And he's been pretty successful at it. So one has to assume that he's figured out ways of making those make sense in a ways that the mere likes of us have not. And not to say that we haven't done that with other things. I can read some forms of code quite well and quite quickly. That makes me think that, again, also with somebody like Vint Cerf, who has lived a pretty successful life doing quite a lot of things, pouring that mind, like I said, kind of cephalopod-like through a tiny gap in order to be able to intervene in a space quite foreign. It's hard to imagine that as difficult anymore. It's hard to imagine why having being able to widen that hole that we are able to kind of think through and what practical consequence that has, because they're like, but I can do all this stuff through this weird keyhole, you know, such that they can barely imagine the fact that there's this gap. But yeah, like if you, and that's where I go to things that have more explicit manual manipulation as a component of it. So if somebody is an intelligence officer, but they also know how to, you know, field strip a rifle, then they probably know the difference between looking through a data set and taking out the sear and the firing pin, and because there's so much more you know in that moment with those things in your hand than you would if you were just trying to set up another down pivot table.
So here is a in from the side thing. The new American military rifles that are coming in soon are quite different from the new Russian and Chinese military rifles. This has nothing to do with my friend, but I think it's really interesting. The thing is, the American rifles are much bigger. Here in Europe, we generally use NATO 7.62, which is what I had. You know, it's a bit hefty. And in America, you have the little 5.56 or some tiny little BB gun thing. So why are the American rifles bigger now? And why is it interesting? Well, they can shoot much further. The ballistic energy that is in a heavier projectile obviously carries damage at a further range. But the key is that instead of like in Vietnam, where you basically spray and pray, if there's going to be fights now, and unfortunately look that there might be, obviously, the optics is what's interesting. So the new amazing fire control, we used to call them scopes, but they do a lot more than that, which America has the technology and can afford to put on the rifles, means that you can now actually aim and hit someone at a considerably further distance. So, you know, the whole thing we talk about seeing further and different views and something, to see it coming down to something that real, I thought was really, really interesting. Basically, they expect to have the capability to have a further range. And of course, with our knowledge work, it's exactly what we're trying to do, right?
Yeah, I think, I mean, and in the same analogy, that it's moving away from spraying it around. You know, if I just get a big enough bucket of information, magic will happen. That doesn't normally prove to be the case. You know, if you know what's in the bucket and you're quite clever, you can do wonderful things with it. But the act of just putting it in the bucket itself, you know, spraying it around, actually, I've found and observed generally doesn't do much for us.
I was going to write a message. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's because we're sitting here in Europe. Maybe it's because we have Ukrainian friends. Maybe it's because I have a military background. To learn a lot of the things going on is very, very interesting. The first thing that was interesting to me is that a lot of the modern weapons work. You know, and when I said that to my friend on Saturday, he looked at me a bit incredulously, saying, you know, we have been using them. We have actually had a series of wars going back for quite a while, you know. It's just that, you know, like in Afghanistan, once it was not on the front pages, people didn't pay attention to it. But the development of these things, like the NLAW, which was developed between Sweden and Britain and developed in a very interesting atmosphere of, they had some kind of a guru dude who opened up everything in the company so that there was no secretive departments for different things. Do you guys know how it works? It's absolutely insane. So it is a rocket thing. It's not like
the shoulder-mounted rocket.
Yeah, it is. But the Javelin goes up and then it goes down, which is, you know, obviously useful. But this thing, what it does is it has two types of sensors in it. One is, you know, optical, obviously, but also magnetic. So even if the tank is trying to visually hide itself, it's, you know, it's flying at incredible speeds, but it will know when it's above the tank and then detonate. How insane is that? You know, I think we can learn so much from the military, but I hope that what we do really can equip civilians to fight the information fight. I really think that's a strong analogy for what we're doing, to literally arm people with tools. But in order to do that, people have to be interested in tools. You know, to go further back with battles, the Battle of Stalingrad, you know, when the Russians were being sent over the river, they were sent without weapons because their life expectancy was less than a minute. And if you found a weapon, you could use it. If not, you know, fine. You know, that's not what we want. What we want is these. Anyway, it's a horrible and scary path to go down. Thankfully, Putin didn't say anything crazy today, though. We did listen to it live.
No, yeah, not crazy enough. So I wanted to talk about the reason why I linked that cool game Candace, and it's because so it's a really interesting game. This guy Mahdi Bahrami also made a really awesome game in Gare, which is sort of a two-dimensional equivalent, being able to kind of build Islamic geometrical sort of sculpture interactively and trying to turn it into a puzzle game, which is partially successful. But Candace in particular is really interesting because it's creating geometric transforms. So if you see the demo or the first video of it, what's happening is you have these grids, and then you can transform and manipulate objects on those grids in order to try to turn something from a plane to a torus, a plane to a cylinder to a torus, and a number of other neat things like that. So you could have I don't know that there's a two-dimensional way you could represent the twist that you would need for a Mobius strip, but if you could do that, you could make to go from a torus into a Klein bottle, which would be fun. But yeah, like I feel like it's a really interesting game. Actually runs on Mac. I hadn't noticed, but that's cool. But also, it's a really interesting basis to think about how one might do actual 3D modeling and the present. And because it's sort of presented in a game-like way, it is a game. It's much more akin to the way that the mechanics of a particular game are introduced piece by piece. I recently was really pleased. My daughter has nearly finished Portal 2. Portal 2 is a much longer game than Portal 1, and it includes a number of mechanics where they introduce this piece, and they reintroduce you to portals, and then they reintroduce you to the inertial properties that you can kind of manipulate with portals. And then they add some other new objects and mechanics, and they build on sort of those and then reintroduce the pieces from before. And that sort of tutorial design approach to layering in this additional functionality and setting it in a context where there's kind of a ludic game-based goal is really phenomenal for learning, because Portal's not an app, and Candace is somewhere between an app and a game. But what it makes me yearn for is imagining something that starts as Portal and ends as Blender, or and my favorite of all is to go like what starts as Doom and ends as Excel.
Well, Doom, the creation tools in there are pretty close. So yeah, good example.
So
right.
Possibly vast severance, capturing all those numbers and put them in a box.
No, but I mean, like there's often a gulf between the specific games that deal with it, but football is a really wonderful context, and wherein like most people haven't played first-person football. It's kind of garbage, I think, in computers. But you definitely play a football player or a football team, and then you manage a football team. And I think I have seen things where you manage a football franchise, and so the abstraction goes up and up and up. So the most abstract of those games definitely look a lot more like Excel than they look like the rest. But yeah, like I really love those escalations, because that's what people kind of do, and that's the way that they approach thinking and doing and understanding what components of something are sort of cognitively relevant. And so yeah, it would be interesting to think about that sort of path of escalation from immediate self-evident needs within the context of something like Author, and go, where do these things fit in, and what do they serve, and how do we notify people about them? Because it's like you had reasons for all of the things that you put in an Author, so that they're not for nothing, but one might be to the exclusion of another based on a different or better understanding. Which again, is not to say that they aren't both relevant for people at different stages of their sort of the cognitive development of using this as a process for problem solving.
Well, I mean, it gets back to that thing, when you're using, you have a variety of things. Is you offer someone, all the tools they might need, and someone said, but which is best? You say, well, I'm not sure that's the right question to ask.
But one thing, Bess, that I wanted to highlight a bit, sorry, I just sparked it there, is with all the potential in VR, one of the things we're learning from this external brain book is how rooted we are in our physiology and in the physicalness of the world. So I think,
and that's my that's my counter to your friend, and to Vint and everybody, is that we still live in these bodies until we stop, and that will be fun and scary. Then we will have a lot of our minds devoted to these, and things like oral stimulation and the not just hearing, but the way we hear, the characteristics of it that come as a consequence of many decades of listening through these, and the gradual deterioration that necessarily entails, and fingertips and knowing the proprioceptive kind of poses of things like that. So
I think that's
we
a good
don't
thing.
use those.
Right.
No, but that means that we're limited in the ways that we understand to having to have an over. Like if you expect that you're actually doing important stuff in Excel, then you lose all of that, and you're having to squeeze yourself.
Okay. I was arguing a different point. I misunderstood you. Yeah. Because what it really leads me towards is trying to model more of the world into VR plus magic. Right. So we don't just go into crazy. Of course, again, crazy stuff has to happen too. But just lots of little things. Like I really look forward to being able to scan my physical room so I can walk around it without no fear. Like, let's call it AR, whatever, that kind of a thing, even though it might be fully. And so many things that could happen. Like, imagine waking up, working early or late, looking out the window, and you can see tomorrow's weather without even thinking about it. You've set that to be 8 hours ahead or whatever. All these ambient things can become really useful. Even parental sharing of information about my child. Like, let's say Edgar gets a children's Apple Watch, doesn't exist yet, of course. And, when he's supposed to be having gym in school, if he isn't, I want to know, whatever. Of course, millions of stock market types things. Also, right now, what's happening in Ukraine, there are so many different feeds you can choose to trust or not trust. If anything changes, is useful. And thank you for interrupting me, Peter, because otherwise I'll go on and on.
I think it'd be really neat if you scanned your room on multiple occasions, then you'd be able to identify what changed. And maybe even like go back, select a book on your bookshelf and find out when it was that you added that book to the bookshelf, and have that automatically come up as information. You and your bookshelf.
I love bookshelves. I'm with you. I mean, I don't have them because I mostly don't. I'm still, it's ceasing to be the case, but I mostly don't read. I think that a bookshelf is a really great sort of basis for thinking about how to pose.
You might have to go to freestanding pretty soon.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much there. Like we talked about earlier, when you go through a physical book, you should be able to scan it just instantly to see what you've annotated. And this is the point I agree with Vint. There's so much 2D stuff we need to do. For instance, the metadata and systems for organizing the books could be done for a 2D display, no question about it. But how amazing would it be? You're working on something. You have your real bookshelf behind you, but you specify a criteria, and all the books that have something specific suddenly are there. That would be very super useful, cool, potentially. Mark?
I was just reflecting on, I mean, something Brandel said earlier, just in the course of things, sort of closed the loop for me, because I've been, and he was talking about the fact that, that when you were talking about your portal, and in a sense, you've got you're learning sort of geometry and physical effects and things. And it made me realize that actually one of the reasons I do a lot of abstract stuff is I'm just very dyspraxic. So I've never been good at Twitch games, ball games, whatever. And it doesn't matter. I mean, I'm old enough to know that it doesn't matter how hard I try. It's not a matter of getting a better coach. I just, I suck at that element of coordination. And one of the things it's forced me to do, and I write slowly and badly, and I've, despite my best attempts, I've never really learned to touch type. And what it's forced me to do is actually work inside here. So in a sense, I don't actually do a lot of VR. I just do it internally without using a headset. And yet, I now come to realize that is actually quite unusual, because some of the work I do involves working with a lot of people for whom, if they can't see it, it doesn't exist, which is almost the other end of the, the other end of the abstraction scale. And looking back, I mean, that used to cause me no end of confusion. Now I know that that's the axis of the disconnection. Then it's easy to bridge across it. But I mean, I don't think there's any great insight from that, but it's funny that that final little thing just fell into place, that I've been slowly sort of closing the circle and realizing, in a sense, why I do a lot of stuff that's quite abstract and a lot of data work. And it's not that it's not that I find it exciting. It's actually more, it's more actually, you might say, a practical survival skill, that if you can't do it the way everybody else does it, you've got to find another route around.
That's fascinating. Yeah, and I think that's one of the challenging aspects of any reaching for anything but the most sort of mechanical level of what it is that people need support within the context of the tool, and why it's hard to imagine what's better in Word than grammar check. And all the frustration that flows from the opinionation there is that you start to have to scratch the surface of what is going on in people's heads, and it's very different. And so you can't build. Most people are supported and assisted by being able to type at typing speeds rather than handwriting speeds, whether they are a touch typist or not. It's often the case that if somebody types slowly, they'll write even slower. And so that's a win. And then spell check mostly works, but it depends modulo the size of the dictionary and people's ability to augment it with their particular kind of domain. Grammar check becomes more tenuous, and so on, until you get to something where a good sizable proportion of the population will start to object to anything beyond that, and they'll say that they'll cry foul, saying that it's going too far in a tool. But yeah, that's again like why that modularity is an essential component of it, to say like, well, which ones do matter to me, which values are in line with mine, and why I think it would be really fun, again, to go back to video games. Remember SimCity 2000 or Civilization? Civilization always had the two advisors, who were often in direct conflict, and SimCity 2000 took it even further, where they had wildly different kind of points of view. I would love assistive tools to fight with themselves. Say, so, do this, no, do that.
Well, good Clippy and evil Clippy.
Right. So that they can show you that what they're sort of recommending and encouraging is not some kind of canonical authority, but something that's underpinned by opinions about where it'll take your work.
It's interesting.
You're into that, Dave, but I think. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I've interrupted. No, I was just thinking it's interesting too. You're mentioning various things like grammar checkers and the things, and the fact is that you might think that a logical thing is, well, you would just have text to speech because I make life easy. But as we've been doing the journal stuff and we've been going through, actually transcriptions, it just reminds you of how differently we speak. So when you hear the speech, all the elisions and all the sort of unfinished sentences and things, your mind basically fills that in. And when you read it, when you see it written out as words, everyone, sadly, most of us sound rather incoherent, shocking as it seems. So that's really quite interesting, which says to me, I remember my wife saying she used to do a certain amount of dictation stuff for legal work, but you almost have to put a different mind on. But because you actually have to think what you're going to say to get it through the narrow portal of, in a sense, what the tool can understand. That's not to be unkind to the software, but it's more that it's no good just sort of saying what you think, because that would need another tool to say, all right, when you said this, what that means in beautiful, unambiguous prose is the following. Yes, right.
Mark, you never say what you think.
It's something that that ties into something that I've been telling my daughter with much amusement, because I just wish I had known it, and I don't think she cares at this point. But saying that a couple of fun things, that written English and spoken English are essentially two different languages that are fairly tenuously connected, and also that spoken English is tonal, despite what people will say about it. Like it's intensely tonal.
No, it isn't.
The way that you sort of
it isn't.
Well, and yeah, that I just loved. There was somebody saying once that that's a speech, not speech, but a speech is like orated writing, but that's the only time it happens. Everything else is this weird mishmash conversational stuff that we produce.
And of course, if you cross to Arabic, I mean that's even more true, because they really are separate languages. And that was the thing fascinating when I had a colleague who was doing a corpus for Arabic text to speech. And one of the real problems they have is, whereas despite what we've just said, that broadly you go take a whole lot of just English literature, feed it in a machine, and it'll give you a fairly good idea of if you know how the words are pronounced, you can do all this chopping down into these. I don't know what I mean, it's not even syllables. The probability matrix for it is done at tiny granularity.
Oh, phonemes.
Yeah, and doing that, and it wasn't until he sort of told me this. I thought, okay, so that's difficult in Arabic. If you can't basically do this, you cannot with the same ease just grab a whole lot of stuff that exists, pour it in the top of the AI hopper or whatever, and actually have all that rich data set with which to construct the necessary phonemes that go in, that are the building blocks of your text-to-speech syndrome software.
There is, of course, no such thing as one spoken Arabic, which is part of the problem.
Yeah. But I mean, it's interesting. But that's it. You can have one. There's a written Arabic that's sort of pan-Arabic speaking.
Yeah, Gulf Arabic.
And then very different spoken. So it's encoded in writing in a common way, but it's spoken very differently. Yeah.
And here is the core of the future of text. And that is, whatever you put in one format or medium that started in another will be different. Can we make that process of change a positive one? That is the entire point of the future of text. It will never, ever be direct.
And one thing I find myself sort of pondering on in terms of looking at new tools and things is, and it's just sort of informed by the time I spent working in a government ministry and sort of looking at what was to do with release of information, which required you to know why something was important or not. So there's a requirement to either send something to the National Archive or destroy it. There is no, those are unescapable responsibilities after N years of holding things. So, now we get to the stage where we've got petabytes of data and no one knows what's in it. And we really don't know what's a shopping to-do list and what is, an important treaty that needs to be saved forever. Because that's something we forgot about in our current tools. The annotation, it's a different sort of annotation. It's not like personal annotation where we read a book and we're reflecting on whether it speaks to us or not, or we disagree or agree. It's more the fact as though that this version, in this endless stream of edits of this page or this document, this is the moment where all the people around the table said, okay, this is the thing we're going to do. Whereas modern documents almost aren't seen as, I think you, Fred, someone saying, when Google Docs were designed, there was no concept of a document. It was just an endless stream of edits, because why would you bother? Because the people designing it didn't write much and didn't make documents, so they didn't have the experience to know that actually sort of, you know, documents do have a life even if it's virtual. And so that's how, in a sense, we come to be where we are. But you know, our future historian selves will not thank us. I mean, we're going to definitely have a bit of a dark age between about late 1980s and probably early 2000s, where just stuff is going to blink out forever and will never be seen.
I was just looking at the studio display. Did you work on the website for that, Brandel?
I did not.
It's so bizarre, so much money for a monitor, and you know what's inside it is amazing, but it's still a monitor. Okay, it's a monitor and
It's a monitor with an A11 in it.
yeah, crazy.
So just so I understand, so in for simple folks who don't, so what's the A11 needed for? Is it just simply to drive the sheer amount of pixels and stuff, or is it doing more beside that?
My understanding is that it's used for center stage, the camera control. So it has a wider FOV camera that is able to cut and pan and scan around a room based on human figures. So it needs to do some basic object recognition and stuff like that in order to not overly tax the device it's connected to. It does it for white balance in order to make sure that it's taking all of the information about the environment. But I wouldn't, and it has a number of microphones and things like that as well, I believe. So there may be some processing there. But I don't know. I don't know what else it's there for, and whether, you know, it's the sort of thing that people will find additional kind of uses for. I like when people have latent capabilities lying in those things. You know, it's slightly disappointing to me that nobody's ever been able to enable an app store for the charging brick, because that, you know, that device actually has a computer more powerful than the Apple II inside it. And I think that would be funny. And I think also that the Apple Pencil has a computer more powerful than the LC3 in it.
Oh, the LC3.
Right. You know, it's fairly modest by modern standards, but you could have some fun on it. So yeah, I like sort of musing about those things and what happens when the sort of the concept of compute power gets abstracted down. You know, there are very, very creative and chaotic people working in various sort of dark corners of the company who play quite disrespectfully with what you could do where with what things. But I don't know what designs they have in mind at this point.
So this is when your Apple Pencil becomes self-aware.
Right.
You said 2C, right?
I believe so.
My first boss, he designed it.
Oh, the Apple IIc?
Yeah, Rob Gamal. I just had to do a double check to make sure it was that model.
I said Apple II, but I'm not sure whether it was the 2C, 2E.
Yeah. It's all a good story. But actually, that's really interesting what you're talking about now, because, you know, there are some systems where, now we're talking about the Apple Pencil, where I think it's Moleskine. Yeah, Moleskine has one set where you're right, that as long as it's in the correct type of paper that has micro dot system on it, developed in Sweden, it will then digitize what you're writing based on the movement where you're on the page. So anywhere you write, which is phenomenal, which obviously ties into digital paper and stuff. But I think that is a technology that could go really far. I mean, the Apple Watch is phenomenal, but I really wouldn't mind Apple Watch capabilities in a pen.
Yeah, I will watch in envy, because as my writings, you know, members of my family have compared it to a form of high-level crypto. The fact that you could digitize it would just be digital crypto, and you still can't read it.
But just imagine though, having a nice pen, Mont Blanc style or whatever.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
By the way, I just saw on Mac Rumors, Johnny Ive has a list of his favorite tools, and none of them are digital. One is a fancy pen. But imagine you have a nice pen. Often it'll be in this pocket. You know, we're all nerds, and it'll have a microphone. So anything you can do with it, you could actually hold the pen up and have a conversation easier than you can with your watch, right? And
Yeah,
imagine
it's
all the
funny.
stuff
You know,
before.
this is my notepad, and it's, you know, it's written in pen and ink or pencil, and anything but biro or gel pen. I don't know why. They write too easily and it gets all skiddy. But there is something nice and tactile about a pen, and also you have to have some care with a pen, otherwise, of course, you end up covered in ink. But even, you know, and just nice inks. You know, ink doesn't have to be standard blue or standard black.
But let's imagine a very advanced Apple Pencil. You know, it's going all the way back to the tools for thought. Affordance says even a stick can be one, right? A shoe phone, yes.
Yeah.
It could be absolutely amazing, because a lot of the things we do, you know, it would work really well in an AR type scenario. It could be known by other devices.
Mm.
You could do measurements from here to there. You know, all you have to do is, you know, point A and it'll hear you, like pencil. It's talking to your pencil. Maybe you go to lunatic asylum for doing that. But anyway, it's just fun to think about that, because we seem to be almost running out of devices. And now it's going to be the headset. But all these things could really augment the headset experience.
But actually, certainly a sort of you know, of AR or VR aware pencil, it's a writing device, because that has a nice close linkage to the whole thing of 6 degrees of freedom, and the fact that most of us are trained to write in some way. So we know it's a tool that we already have some facility with.
That I just realized that, of course, this is not knowledge that I have been given, so I can talk about it on a public video, but I am pretty, you know, obviously we've been talking about Apple using other current devices in their AR, VR thing. Of course, the AirPods are going to be part of it somehow, at least the technology. But it is not unreasonable that Apple is actually working on using maybe the next generation Apple Pencil as the device. Instead of having a clunky controller like this, you actually use your Apple Pencil in VR. That would be interesting. Yeah, don't worry, Brandel, you don't have to say anything, whether you know or not. But as a concept, that could be super elegant. Imagine, you know, you're working on your iPad, doing whatever, put your headset, and it's a known interaction you can do in your world. Cool. Wearable shoe phone.
Yeah, one of the things that I was really, something that I've really enjoyed, I don't know if I found the specific video, but Bill Buxton talking about pencils and drawing and surfaces and accretion. And for those of us who have had to appreciate a small child's drawing, they're often briefly wonderful and then somewhat ruined by additions. And so you get a definite appreciation for it, and a better appreciation for it when you're actually present for the accumulation of all of the detail onto the drawing, because they sort of mean different things by different strokes, and that's all thrown out the window as a consequence of seeing it as the final artifact. And I really love the idea that when somebody has, you know, somebody has the ability to scrub back and forth over the entire process of laying down and drawing, and the process whereby somebody has made something, that there's something really special about it. So I'm very much looking forward to not necessarily AR, VR, but a ubiquitous computing environment that allows us to encode the entirety of our actions and recognize that those are important encodings, not just down to the keystroke, but actually to the bodily orientation of somebody as they were doing it, because you know, context restoration, being able to understand the sort of the mindset, and going beyond the headset to the mindset of what people were thinking about and why they were putting those things down. I think it would be really great for.
I'm now imagining, you know, getting inside the mind of the person doing Trump's tweets. I mean, no, just reflecting on this thing that, if you're sort of saying, so the, how you were feeling, how you were sitting at the time you do this. Yeah, interesting.
There are some interesting search results on Apple Pencil VR.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, it's nice to invent just crazy stuff, but it's also fun to pull back and see what things exist and how can they be used in this. One of the nicest technologies that exist today that I think that are largely ignored is the map view in Apple Photos. Just to be able to look at the places and it's like, what are we taking? The integration is still crap. If I say to Siri, show pictures I've taken here, that rarely works.
Mm-hmm.
But I know the data is there because on the map, it shows it to me. It is really nice when it does work. Oh, I was here before.
It takes me back to, I remember it was quite early on when digital maps were coming in and somebody did the site, he'd gone off and he scraped it because it was basically making a point about sort of data privacy, but it was the one about where does my owner live or something. Basically, he'd taken dog and cat photos and taken the geo-encoding of the image out and then put it across a map. And I remember it caused a bit of a stir at the time because sort of, certainly some people didn't realize that was even possible.
Yeah. Yeah, the future is interesting. I had my old professor from Syracuse University email me a couple of times over the last week, bugging me about, well, what is the future of text? And I spent a couple of emails explaining, as an organization, it's just an open thing. We absolutely don't want to be in any way prescriptive. But, then I explained what we're trying to do as a company, which is very different. But yeah, it's interesting having these discussions, looking at these things. I'm sure there was another point I was going to make, but it's not in my head anymore, so I apologize. And there was
I find myself dwelling on this idea of, the more sort of the more involved pencil, the Apple, a tool like this, because I must say I still use one of these a lot. I use a battery
deodorant. I thought you were showing deodorant.
No, I also use that. You'll be glad to hear, but in fact I use the battery ones because I never understood the point of a mouse that had to be charged using the one bit that shouldn't be showing. But this combination basically of a haptic surface with a mouse, I still find this much more powerful because I think I get more control of dexterity than I do on a trackpad.
Yeah, I don't, and that's why it's great that we can choose different input mechanisms. I think that's really an interesting issue. I really like the keyboard and the trackpad like this, like you have on a laptop. One of the key things stopping me from buying the big display is then I don't want to use this display and then I have to use this movement to get to the trackpad or a mouse. I don't like that at all. I like this.
But then I despite my best efforts, I'm not a touch typist. So and that actually has quite that interestingly has quite a I've come to sort of see over time, it has quite an effect on the way you interact with effectively with the controls, because your hands are not constrained to the keyboard. So I absolutely get that if I was touch typing, because the keys would effectively be on the keyboard most of the time, and then you can use your sort of thumbs on the trackpad. But then again, a lot of work I'm doing is fine data work, which is an awful lot of very fine drag, drop, copy, paste at speed, which uses a different sort of dexterity. So I tend not to type a lot, but I'm interacting with text most of the day. But I'm doing things with it rather than creating it.
I always wondered why we didn't put a display on the top surface of the trackpad.
There is one. It's the thing on the laptop, on top of the keyboard. It's really cool. And you know, my father, who was a terrible typist, he preferred typing on his phone for exactly that reason. The result and the action were closer together.
Mhm.
So I think I agree. I think I understand and agree with your question or point or thing.
Hmm.
But when it comes to voice interaction, now that voice is just so much better than it's ever been, the interactions don't seem to have followed. So we should, you know, like in author, I'm just looking at it here. Sorry for looking distracted. Let me just see. We have the normal button, I think, for dictation. Yeah. So I'm just dictating something right now, and let's see how it is. Period, and so on. Yeah, it's okay. But the interaction for turning it on and off and also pausing is a bit rubbish. It should be really easy on the keyboard to turn it on, because once you're forced to speak at length without feedback, it's difficult.
Hmm. Yes, and of course the other practical thing is, for most people in a workspace, they're not in a location where, you know, if you imagine sort of 90 people on a floor plate, and they're all actually speaking to their computers, that's going to be that's going to be quite a challenging environment for the sound processing. Yeah, no, absolutely. But I'm perfectly okay with my touch typing. I think it's better than speaking because you use different parts of your brain. But for those moments where it is useful, because when I send messages to Emily, tell my wife I'm almost finished. It just works every single time.
Ready to send it?
It was a bit more than what I thought she was listening to.
Ready to send it?
No, don't send it. But yeah, since you brought it up, Mark, that's interesting. I mean, the watch is fantastic. Set a timer for 1 minute. It never goes wrong. But it's like, I mean, I was reflecting on the fact over time, I've noticed that I actually listen to, although I mean, loads of music and I like it, and I don't want to listen to it, but actually I listen to music less and less when I work. Except if I'm writing late at night or something, because somehow I find it puts me in a very different place. So I guess it's that if I wanted to isolate from everything else, but sometimes I find it too isolating, and it just pulls me away from other tasks. So I'm conscious of going, working as a consultant, going in there, and there's sort of the sight you're now generally greeted with, which is a room full of people, all with some headphones on. Which is another interesting observation. Well, if you're basically working in private, you might as well be doing it at home, which indeed many people now are. Just trying to write this down.
Yeah, in terms of music, when I'm actually working, I tend to listen to the same 5-minute loop of music for sort of multiple hours at a time, just as partly as predictable noise, but it doesn't have any lyrics and it doesn't have anything else that I need to be sort of anticipating or doing any mental work to listen to, and it's just to shut all of that stuff off.
Actually, funny enough, Bach or Gregorian chant I find rather good. It's almost ironic that it should be so old. But I mean, in a sense, Gregorian chant, you could say, is just, ambient music of an earlier age, pretty constant tempo.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a few. Johnny M, he does very good music that is fantastic, I think, to work to, because it's very repetitive. And when that then played in the car with the family, it becomes clear that it is just for that.
Well, much music is a private pleasure, I think.
If we should have in Author a keyboard shortcut to turn on and off listening, what should it be, guys? By default, it's some kind of a globe symbol, D. I don't even know what that is.
Globe is now the
the
supposed to be
function,
the
yeah.
function key. Ironically, this
Yeah,
is something else.
yes.
This is something else that gets me is that
This works, full stop.
so the globe symbol
Is there-
doesn't yet have a Unicode symbol in most fonts. There's I think there's a globe emoji, but that does a different thing. But there isn't, because one of the things I constantly find myself is troubled by is I'm constantly writing stuff referring to Apple keyboard shortcuts, but they're only available in about 2 fonts. I guess I can see why, but yeah. So yeah, the function which is only came in a few years ago. It's quite recent, but obviously it's now on all the new laptops. But I think the globe is supposed to be the function key. What previously was FN on older keyboards.
Does any of you have a good resource? I looked a while ago for how you can use the Apple speech to text. In other words, what are the commands that can be spoken? Because that's one of the unnerving bits. If you don't remember, is it full stop or is it period? And that kind of stuff.
I imagine it would do both, because otherwise they'd probably get angry letters. Probably angry letters on paper written in ink from people complaining that, you know, their version of that is not supported.
Wouldn't, what can I say, tell you what you're allowed to enter as commands? I remember that working way back.
Are
But
you
you're actually
asking about? Are you asking about what abilities can you give Siri within your app?
No. That will be
No, interrogating Siri on all recognized commands.
That's a more interesting question, actually. What you said there, Brandel. All I mean is, I'm now going to add a bit in the user guide for Author because I've forgotten to mention it because it's basically supplied by Apple. But I don't want to have just what I typed in the chat here. I would also like to say, to learn more, have a look at. And so far, it's just like articles in magazines and nothing. That may have changed. Hang on.
Well, that's always a conundrum, I think, for any designers, because there's all this depth in there. If you write it out for people, they won't read it because it's too long. Because, of course, the time they're reading it, they're not interested in what's there.
I found a nice one.
And then when you need it, but then when you want it, you can't find it.
I found a nice one. It's it's a long time ago. I'll just put the link in.
The lights on Mac keyboards aren't individually addressable, are they? Because there's an
Oh,
individual.
that's interesting. Tell me what you want with that. That's
Well, the thing is that when you put your finger on a modifier key, then that means that there's a subset of possible actions that you would expect to be able to take. So if you can light individual ones, and that's definitely the case with Razer keyboards, that they allow you to have computer control of the colors, and they're actually RGB LEDs underneath them, which, you know, is mostly used for obnoxiousness, but it could be used for good as well.
I must say the Apple keyboard palette always gives me joy. I mean, and the number of people who don't even know it's there amazes me. But, you know, you press a key and it will show you that, you know, you press the modifier and it will show you the range of things that you can do.
Oh, that palette. I thought you were talking about just the ecstasy that you're thrown into by going white and off black.
Oh, no.
Black. Like, yeah, that's, I mean, I guess they're very tasteful. So that, yeah, I get you. Yeah.
It's silly things, because I'm the sort of annoying person that puts, you know, footnotes in posts. So I now know where the dagger and double dagger are, things like that.
Is there any way to get the Mac to just give you a phonetic transcription of what it hears? You know, don't try to figure out what English word I want. Just tell me what the actual phonemes were that came in. And then, let me do my own processing on my side using that.
Yeah, to take that from IPA to what words it might mean. That's interesting. I've not heard or seen of any system that provides that in large part because I suspect because of how opaque, the presentation of phonemes is, and potentially the fact that they're actually lossy. And if you were to look at something slightly closer to the raw truth, you would see that what's being picked up is fuzzy. But I don't know. I just know how many times we've called our lounge the holodeck, and whenever I tell Google to turn the lights off in the holodeck, it's probably 3 times out of 5 that it succeeds, but the other 2 are deeply frustrating because if you've gotten it wrong once, then it's very likely that the way you're talking at that moment is likely to be misinterpreted along the same lines.
That's another really interesting thing is how and when you want to scrub bad data. Because of course, one of the things that's going on with all these systems is they're constantly collecting a sort of data set to make themselves cleverer. So it's perfectly possible just in the ordinary run of things that you actually sort of give it a bad example. What I found this maps across from it seems to be far too easy to, in a hurry, accept a suggested correction for mistyping, and then that goes in the local dictionary, normally without you noticing, and it's not until somewhere later and you keep wondering why this wrong word keeps turning up. And it's fascinating. It was really interesting actually reading the book about the iPhone design and the sort of keypad thing and this figuring things out, because I'm always mystified. The spell checking on messages is actually not nearly as clever as most of the other apps. One thing it struggles with is detecting letter transpositions. So you just transpose 2 letters and it will have no suggestions more often than not. And I don't know whether that's something to do with the fact it sort of connects into the phone ecosystem where you don't necessarily have so much processing power or access to a background lookup, or not. Because if when you're typing, it's I mean, it's a very dyslexic thing to do. You just transpose input figures. So somewhere between here and here, the wires get crossed and it comes out wrong. And yes, you may type something that at first sight is obviously not a word, but to the eye is immediately apparent. Oh right, I put the T and the A the wrong way around.
Oh, I have a typo on my email address that somehow got stuck into Apple's system memory of things to suggest when I'm starting to type in email addresses.
This is a sentence.
I don't know where it's stored or how to get rid of it. It's so
Full
frustrating.
stop. New line. New line.
But apparently once
Not really happy with that.
apparently once, maybe 5 or 8 years ago, I typed PJS.ESQ instead of PJW because my finger had slipped slightly. And now that suggestion of, do you mean PJS as opposed to PJW is stuck in there somewhere. I don't know. Any idea how I could find that and purge it?
Well, that speaks to sort of, a missing utility somewhere, which is the thing that says, basically, show me the dictionary chain attached to this input. Because it might be in mail, it might be in, because often you're working through several levels, and if you've got other things like text expander running, so there may be 4 or 5 things that may be introspecting your input and altering it on the fly. It's the same problem with trying to find which application is responding to a shortcut, especially when you're using a shortcut in an application, it's not working because something else is sitting on it, but you don't know what. There is actually a thing called it's called Shortcut Detective, and it's a tiny little app, but it does a reasonable job of that. Somebody built ages ago, and it's a bit of freeware they left there, and it's probably soon won't work because it won't have been updated for the latest OS.
Interesting.
But
I have to drop a 10.
yeah,
But,
yeah. So yeah, that's it's the same. It's the same problem pattern. There is basically trying to say between me pressing a key, what's looking at this before it arrives in the display space.
So Brandel, will you be able to, do you think, by midday UK time Wednesday, have a look at a movable card in VR?
that sounds a little tight. A movable card, yes. Scalable, no.
Okay, no, that's fine, because just moving it close is kind of scalable too. So she just gets a feel for, wow, that's useful as well. And it will be scanned at the resolution we already have. So that should be fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Brandel, it's a complexity that if it's got to be scalable, it has to know more about itself, because presumably if you make a 3D object.
No, it would just be the gestures, being able to distinguish between doing things with one hand versus two, and what to do in there. If you had, say, a controller and you were to use the joystick on the controller to scale it up and down, then that would be pretty trivial, because they are distinct sort of inputs that you can kind of configure to be like that. So you'd be able to use the trigger. And in fact, the default sort of boilerplate for the WebXR experience basically gives you that. But to be able to get one finger and then two fingers and then know where the centroid is that you should be scaling from, all that kind of stuff. It's just, it's kind of a faff if you don't have it already set up, but it's sort of trivial to know what to do, just it isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting, Brandel.
Okay.
I'm glad we got that on video. See you all on Friday. Bye for now.
Cool.
See you Friday.
Yeah.
Goodbye.